What's up, Yoon fam? It is I, Mark Yoon, and hopefully I'm bringing you another exciting video for today. So what I got for you today is another one of those mini docu-series things that I've done in the past. This one is a topic that we've touched on before, but I just wanted to get more in depth and actually provide the evidence for things that I've talked about in the past. And that is pretty much the fate of Project Soul, where they've come from to where they are now, why we saw so many problems and troubles with Soul Calibur 5. A lot of people don't know that Project Soul actually disbanded and was finished until it had new leadership and put together a new team. And that's why we see a lot of asset reusing and relying on outside companies for financing so that they can actually get the stuff done. But without further ado, we're just going to jump right into it. Leave a like, it's always appreciated, and let's begin. So we're going to start here with the fate of Project Soul. This is an article that I brought up from an interview, a Japanese interview, and it's been translated. And basically it's just talking about different points in the history of Project Soul. This is going to be the first thing that we're looking at. I do have 3 other resources, and all of them are going to be linked in the description box down below right before the main description, so you can go and look at these yourself because there's a lot more than what I'm covering. These are pages and pages and pages of documents. So if you are curious for yourself, you can go take a look. But this is just pretty much to quell a lot of the argumentation I've seen before about budgetary constraints and stuff like that. But hopefully this sheds light on some of the reasons why things have been done the way they have. And that's it. So let's begin. And first, we're going to start with this interview, which was actually, this partition was actually labeled The Fate of Project Soul. Thank you all for the encouragement. These are in quotations. We're moving ahead with our plan. Wish the Soul Calibur team never had to break up. A lot of time was lost. And this is in reference to when the Soul Calibur team originally broke up. No Musher says, the team was disbanded. It was good we were able to regroup, but this time we're planning ahead so we never have to break up again. A long-lasting vague speculation confirmed. Project Soul, the team directly behind Soul Calibur 3, Broken Destiny, was dissolved by Namco. Their confirmed project Broken Destiny was released in late August and early December of 2009. And Daishi claims that they intended on a console port but were stopped due to business reasons, quote unquote. These business reasons? If so, there were 10 months during which no Soul Calibur game was intended or possible. A scary thought when Project Soul's former director, Hiroki Yotoriyama, flat out said that they had planned for a Soul Calibur 4 after finishing Soul Calibur 3. And still took 3 years. Granted, there was the release of Soul Calibur 3 Arcade Edition a year later, but Soul Calibur 4 got Broken Destiny also a year later, and then another rare year of inaction. We were heading for a 3-year development cycle, improbable with the next Soul Calibur game coming out in the same generation. They didn't have to start building brand new hardware, but didn't expect a new Soul Calibur game in 2011. Because generally, as we usually see, they do build a new engine for the next generation. We saw this jump from PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 2 with Soul Calibur 2 and Soul Calibur 3. Soul Calibur 3 was built from the ground up on a completely different engine, because as we're knowing here, it wasn't really supposed to be a sequel. And then on top of that, we have the next generation of consoles when they came out. So Soul Calibur 4 was pretty much rushed upon and looked with I guess watched eyes, but we'll get to that in a minute. In the end, breaking up Project Soul has less to do with the team and more to do with Hiroki Yotoriyama himself. He was the one who produced every game, except for Soul Edge, where he gets a basic plan of support, credit, whatever that means. He was the head of Project Soul. Project Soul still had a website. Daishi's new team will likely continue to take on former members, and while there is not the same splash screen that the trailer used next Soul Calibur game drops, it will be a Soul Calibur game still. That leaves us with the Daishi himself. By his own admission, he's a former player who was hired by Namco. He's got credits as a level designer in Soul Calibur 3 and a game director for Soul Calibur 4 and Broken Destiny. Compared to Yotoriyama, we don't know much about him. However, he was the one thing that gives him a leg up. Yotoriyama has an executive producer credit for Soul Calibur Legends. Daishi had nothing to do at all with that game. Fun fact, Soul Calibur 4 has a quality assurance tester credit as Ricky Ortiz. What do you think that means? So that's just a little insight on when Project Soul actually broke up. Like, a lot of this that's coming directly from their mouths is going to be labeled and laden with PR rhetoric and talk. There's a lot of like the company this, the company that, especially with how company lifestyle is in Japanese culture. So we can only infer direct like results of reasons why things happen, little hints here and there that we are like supposed to think of and expand upon ourselves. So there's a lot to actually dive into for that part, and there was just a little tidbit. That was the only confirmation I can actually find from their mouths themselves about Project Soul's breakup. This happened multiple times. The first time happened after Broken Destiny, and the second time happened after Soul Calibur 5 before Motohiro Okubo took over as main producer and director. When 2012 hit, fighting games were in the limelight in a big way, and esports was beginning to grow. In interviews, it has been stated that one of the goals with Soul Calibur 5 was to capitalize on this, and many of the game's decisions were made in order to appeal to competitive players. Now, this is also a big problem why Soul Calibur 5 turned out the way that it did. It lost a lot of zeal. It lost a lot of its. It lost a lot of what it had gained prior and what was built upon, and it went for a completely competitive market, which everyone knows that like in the FGC, the fighting game community, it's understandable to move on to another game when like another one pops up that's fresh. We can see these a lot of times with free-to-play games. Like for the longest time, it was Counter-Strike that was important for all the FPS players. Then it moved to different Battle Royale games like PUBG, and then it was foreshadowed by Fortnite. So there's a lot of different like generational movements within the community itself. So when you're pushing towards that one community, unless they like love your fighting system, it's really hard to keep their notice and keep eyes on that game. So that's why I think the single player stuff exists, so it can actually get the sales going, because competitively speaking, and if you're looking into the competitive limelight and you want to actually jump into competitive play, purchasing the game is not always a requirement, especially if you're sponsored and you join a team. Like usually they have provided product. So it's more of an advertisement or a cross-promotional use, but the main focus of people purchasing is usually the physical copies, and that's usually based on the standard player base or what they would call casuals. This is not a bad thing in theory, but another problem was that even during development, the game's publisher Daishi Odashima openly said that he left Bandai Namco, and he felt Bandai Namco was rushing the team. Odashima didn't stop there. Even post-release, he maintained that not even 1/4 of the game's planned story content was actually part of the title in the end. In short, Soul Calibur 5 team ended up having to cut a lot of content from the game, so it's difficult to see what their original vision actually was. But even then, the glimpses that we did see of their original vision when it comes to story purposes appealing to the casual fans seem questionable at best. Now there's parts of this that I agree with and parts that I disagree with. The first part that I actually agree with is we don't know what the original vision was. That's why people, let's use the example of Justice League. People really didn't like Justice League until they found out that Snyder, who was taken off the project because of family reasons, actually had a director's cut, and this Zack Snyder director's cut was supposedly a lot better than the vision that like they put forth into cinemas, and people were begging for it for forever. So this would tentatively be something akin to that. So the team from Soul Calibur actually had a plan that was very different from the one that Bandai Namco actually ended up putting forth, and even they weren't happy with what it was and felt that they were rushed and time constraints were put on them, and there was too much of an emphasis on esports in order to produce a quality product for them. But when they say that like it comes to story purposes appealing to casual fans seem questionable at best. The casual audience is the audience that you always want to grab, especially in marketing. So in marketing, what you have is your lead demographic. What your lead demographic is, based on statistics, the number of people and what groups, age range, all that stuff is what usually generally purchases your product. Whether you're doing a change or whether you're focusing on a new demographic or a secondary demographic, usually doesn't change the point. And Soul Calibur and many other fighting games, including Mortal Kombat and Tekken, have always been more streamlined to a casual audience, and this is for a very good purposeful reason. You can't lock a game behind a difficulty, or you can't lock a standardized game behind like upsetting combo strings and stuff like that, because if you're a new player or a newcomer, especially if you're a young kid and you're jumping into it for the first time, you can easily be overwhelmed, throw the game away, never look at it again, and never purchase any sequels. So if they want a return on investment, or they want a solid consumer base that's going to constantly purchase their product, then they're going to have to appease the casual audience as well as the diehards. And the diehards usually do get appeased by systems that are actually interrelated underneath of the casual system. There's usually systems within systems in these games, and you really see the true nature of that come out within competitive play. It's a totally different thing from playing with one of your buddies than like going to one of these tournaments and playing against someone who puts like thousands and thousands and thousands of hours into just one game only just to become perfected with one character or the one game. But the rest of that I mostly agree with. And then here we have a tweet from Motohiro Okubo. You can find him at Achilles_Okubo on Twitter. And this is talking about Season 2 for Soul Calibur, because a lot of people said that since the data was in the game's files, then it was supposed to have had 3 seasons from the get-go. And a lot of those times codes are put into data files to be placeholders for possible, but maybe not always probable DLC. It's just to hold place in the code, so that if they work HTML in around it, or they put in some code around it, it's not going to affect the overall game and create bug issues and stuff like that. So you have to hide it in different folders with codes and stuff, and a lot of times they aren't even utilized. Actually, in the game's files, you can even find like developer stuff that you're not supposed to see, like bug testing, QA stuff, and all that's not even supposed to be in the game, but it's locked off by hidden folders. And he stated, there were no plans. Okay, so let's go back to the original tweet where Soul Calibur, it said, tweeted this out on August 5th of 2019. They said, transcend history once more with Soul Calibur 6's Season Pass 2, introducing Haomaru from SNK Samurai Showdown as a guest character. Season 2 will include a total of 4 new characters. And then Motohiro Okubo actually retweeted that and comment tweeted and said, there were no plans for Season 2, but Project Soul was able to get a green light. This is all because of your support. I would also like to thank SNK for having the permission within such a short period. Thank you once again. So we have 3 different little tweets here. 3 different little pieces of this tweet, which I find important. The first thing is, this is all because of your support. Meaning what I was stating in the past, that the only reason why Season 2 was greenlit is because of the sales from Season 1. Being that the budget is usually only constrained to what's originally planned, and that would be the original base game itself outside of DLC. Maybe if there is 1 season of DLC planned from the jump, because Tira was added later because she wasn't finished when the game went platinum already, then we would have different aspects of allocations towards that. But anything from there on out would be based totally on sales, and if that sales can actually be split with the parent company, the licensees, the funders, and then also amongst themselves, and then lastly it would go into if we have future development money to work with, which would increase a budget. The only other way to get a higher budget for that is to actually go back to the production company, which would have been Bandai Namco, and ask them for an extension or a lease based on the past sales of a bigger budget that would be paid back to the company, and then profits would be allocated after that. But the reason why we didn't see that this much with Soul Calibur 6 is because since Project Soul was disbanded twice, there's not much faith in the series. It doesn't do gangbuster sales like something like Tekken does, so when it's compared to its sister company, it always looks like it comes up short, but it definitely has a solid fan base. The biggest problem with this is online numbers, because a lot of the fans that play Soul Calibur have been playing since the beginning, as well as most of them from Tekken, but that always had like more of a competitive online aspect to it, where Soul Calibur was more of a fantasy fighter. Even though it has the most fluid fighting mechanics in my opinion, the online was never its like main its main focus. It was always more on the single player aspects, as we see clearly with games like Soul Calibur 2 and Soul Calibur 3, which, even though they were competitive, had a huge amount of single-player stuff in the game, so we haven't even seen since then. The second thing I want to note is I would also like to thank SNK to have permission within such a short period, which means that they didn't know who the guest was going to be, because even though they had the code for the 3 characters besides them inside there, they still had to find not only funding but licensing for a guest character that would actually push this forward, not only for financial reasons but also for cross-promotional reasons. So there's a lot of different intricacies of why they pick something like that. And like I said, it's usually a game that's upcoming soon or released within that same fiscal year, not regular year, so you have to go on a 3-month basis based on business standards. and how Maru actually fit that for Samurai Showdown. So it's easy to have a cross promotion between SNK and them because you bring over both player bases. But it also said that Project Soul was able to get the green light. Now, to get the green light is actually a very important part of this statement, because as we've known for Okubo to do, or as many of you have watched my channel know, he was one of the bigger proponents to get this game into development in the first place. Like, after Soul Calibur 5, not technically after 5, Broken Destiny started it, then 5 went along with it, and then when they did that free-to-play model game, that was what really killed the franchise, and at that time Soul Calibur was dead, and there was no expectations of a follow-up game, that being Soul Calibur 6, so it's a mini miracle that we even got it in the first place, and it's because of the hard work of the development team. Now let's go on to a little bit more stuff about stuff from Soul Calibur 5 specifically that led to a lot of this decline. This has to do with a lot of factual evidence based from the team, based from us, from fan feedback, and all that other stuff. So we have creators Pest. Namco threw Patroclus Alexander under the bus during their 2015 popularity poll, stating they were impressed that the hero of Soul Calibur 5 placed so low, even below characters like Dampierre. For example, he placed number 37 out of 45 characters, with only 32 votes received out of an overall 10,000 that were cast. Sure enough, Soul Calibur 6 turned out to be a reboot that returns the original setting of the series, and Patroclus was among the first characters alongside with other 5 newcomers that were confirmed to be cut from the game. The original timeline, but the events of 5 in particular, is then treated as a bad future, quote-unquote, and both Zasalamel and Cassandra are entrusted to set right what once went wrong. So we're going to move on to this, but this part is really... I want to go over this once again. It says, but the events of 5 in particular are then treated as a bad future, and both Zasalamel and Cassandra are entrusted to set right what once went wrong. Meaning that there's 2 different roles that are euphemistically being played here. So metaphorically speaking, Zasalamel is the development team, and Cassandra is us. So Zasalamel is working behind the scenes to try and make sure that this horrible future doesn't come to fruition. As much as some of you like the characters and like 5, there's aspects of 5 that I like, especially the creation engine and stuff like that. But there's no doubt in my mind that this is the biggest reason for the downfall of Project Soul originally. And we, the audience, or the game base, actually are set as Cassandra. So we're the ones that are spreading word of mouth, like just how she's going through her portals and warning her past self about a dangerous future to come and how to prevent it. This is the same thing that we're being looked at to do. This is spread through word of mouth, this is spread through YouTubers like myself, and you guys who pass this along and share it. So that's just a really important anecdote that I wanted to put forth. And then we go on. Additionally, Cassandra is given the honor of naming Sophitia's firstborn, and decides that if the child is a boy, he should be named Deucalion, though this would actually affect Pyrrha, the less controversial sibling of the two, unless the impending timeline changes somehow affect the birth order of Sophitia's kids. So this is another huge, important anecdote here. So what we have here is now, because of the events of Soul Calibur 6, Sophitia was given Cassandra the option to rename her child. So instead of being Pyrrha, which was the daughter, they would actually rename the firstborn child. You can see it on screen, it's hard to pronounce. I'm going to say this is Deucalion. It's Deucalion. Deucalion. Now they said the order of the children. Now here's my thing. I was originally saying that we're not even sure, since the events have changed so much, especially with Cassandra, which was key. Now notice there's a reason why Zasalamel and Cassandra were the only ones to be mentioned from the old timeline. They're the only ones that have direct impact, especially with Sophitia's children. So now that she's happily married, and now that she is living her life, and Cassandra wants to kind of take up the fight for her, we can definitely see that they might only have one child. And this new Deucalion, I hope they translate that or fix that somewhere, shorten it. But the new child's name would inherently be Cassandra, once again, the audience being told that we didn't like this, we're changing this, this is the new change going forward, and it would ultimately erase them from the past timeline. So you can always go back and play Soul Calibur 5, but what this is definitely mentioning is that 5 was a big reason why Project Soul failed, and they want to actually get away from Sophitia's kids as they were. We may see both of them born again, or we may just see this one with a new change. It may be a boy, maybe a girl. We have no idea yet. Not even sure if it's going to have Setsuka's moveset. It might be a completely different storyline, because that's what happens with the butterfly effect. If people aren't aware of the butterfly effect, it's pretty much an H.G. Wells classic, but it talks about how one butterfly wing flap can cause a tornado across the planet. And this actually is usually used in reference to time travel, where you can see in Ray Bradbury's A Sound of Thunder, they have these glass roads that they're supposed to walk on, and when they go back to prehistoric times and they're not supposed to touch anything, one guy accidentally steps off the path and steps on a butterfly. They don't know anything about it, but when they go back to the future, it's a completely dystopian wasteland, and all the events of everything were changed just because he stepped on that butterfly. Because it sets things in motions, like maybe that butterfly was supposed to go to a certain flower and pollinate and then mate and then have children which go to another place, and then it just spreads forth from there like a tree branch, and the entire course of the future is changed. So this is like trying to say that just something as simple as Cassandra meeting her past self can completely throw the events of the future. And we've already seen much also changes. I talked about that in Monday's video, all the differences between the timelines, and those things going forward can push it into a new direction. Now we have executive meddling. The reason we didn't get to see Project Soul's vision for 5 come to fruition a few years in, Namco cut Project Soul's funding. Now this is what I've been talking about. A lot of people haven't really understood this. Some of you have taken it at face value, but here's it from the horse's mouth directly. It says, we didn't get to see the full vision of Project 5 come to fruition because a few years in, Namco cut Project Soul's funding and staff, and then forced Project Soul to release Soul Calibur 5 early in order to capitalize on the relative weak end of January market. This was them trying to still push themselves into esports tournaments and get the game out there and sold before the next fiscal season started, which would be February. And they cut their funding and cut their staff, so they were literally forced to do this on a shoestring budget. That's why most of the story and everything was cut, not only because it was rushed, but the project. But Namco literally destroyed any hopes of actually making the game come to fruition that they wanted to see. Now we have the next bracket, exiled from the community. The main reason Necrid never appeared after Soul Calibur 2 is that the rights to the character are shared between Namco and Todd McFarlane, creating copyright issues that prevent him from returning to future games. This is also something that I've mentioned to you guys in the past, is that Todd McFarlane actually created it. When he put Spawn in the game, he was told that he can create a brand new character for the game, and he owns the majority of the rights to that. Now, since he doesn't have a license right now with them, they're not authorized to use his character, even though they own half of it. We talked about this in my Necrid video. I just wanted to brush over this again. So basically, even though they own half the character, they have no rights to use the character. So it's unlikely that we'll ever see him come back, especially right now that the licensing for Spawn is delved out video game-wise to Midway for Mortal Kombat 11. And there's no signs of that game slowing down anytime soon, and we don't know what's going to happen from there. So for the foreseeable future, Necrid has no chance of coming back unless Todd McFarlane decides that he wants him back in the game for some reason, which would need some kind of monetary incentive for him, which Project Soul really doesn't have laying around these days, not a lot of liquid cash. And now we have another bracket called Franchise Killer Soul Calibur 5. Only barely subverted this. After the backlash and middling sales from it many changes, Namco initially didn't think that the series was worth keeping around, until convinced by Motohiro Okubo to greenlight another game. That game is Soul Calibur 6. It is a continuity reboot that undoes everything 5 tried to do. The reception and sales were positive enough that it saved the same series 5 nearly killed off. Now this is from the horse's mouth. I have a link to all these in the description box down below. But this is literally from interviews and from holders and from findings from within the company itself. Because a lot of people have told me that the reboot is supposed to go along the same things and maybe they want to slightly change things. That's not what it says here at all. It literally says here that Motohiro Okubo basically begged to reform Project Soul and to make Soul Calibur 6, so he had to prove that he can do this, and they gave him a shoestring budget. And that Soul Calibur 6 is a continuity reboot. That means a reboot of the continuity. So even though there's 2 different timelines, they're only using that as an excuse to keep the stuff that they like and erase the stuff that they don't. So that now bad future isn't still going on. That timeline's over. So it's not like you can just, like in Marvel, use the Infinity Gauntlet and jump between the timelines and that thing's still going on. It had a full stop. So once you go over to that timeline, it is there, no longer there. That's why Cassandra is traveling within the astral chaos, within the alternate dimensions, not in that timeline anymore, and Zasalamel had to warn his future self as well. So it's a continuity reboot that undoes. Doesn't mean that it alternates or it junctions from a different standpoint. It literally says undoes everything 5 tried to do. The reception and sales were positive enough that it saved the same series that 5 nearly killed off. So Soul Calibur 6 did come along and was a savior to the series, and it literally finalized it as a console series again. So we will be seeing a Soul Calibur 7 based on the numbers, because just based on physical sales alone, they doubled their projections that Bandai Namco gave them in order to keep the series going, and that's also why we've seen little monetarily increases for the DLC packs. Running the Asylum. One could argue that the major factor in the series' steady decline in the new 10s was the departure of its founder, Hiroki Toriyama, and Project Soul's subsequent reshaping in the wake of its absence. Soul Calibur 5, being the first game whose creation was not led by Yu Toriyama, definitely had this feel. His successor, Daishi Odashima, was noted to be a tournament player back in the days of the original Soul Calibur and an avid fan of Street Fighter III Third Strike. His envisioning of the revival of Soul Calibur involved the decision to carry out a 17-year time skip, one that admitted to be arbitrary by Odashiyama himself, which placed many long-standing and popular veterans with younger, more anime-inspired successors, many of whom were criticized for being one-note. And many of the story revolved around Patroclus, son of Sophitia, in his quest to save his sister Pyrrha. Many pointed out that it felt more like personal fan fiction becoming reality as opposed to being a true sequel to Soul Calibur. He did want to call it Soul Edge 2 after all. Soul Calibur 5 relied heavily on Street Fighter influenced mechanics, most notably the inclusion of meter and supers along with alterations to the guard impact mechanics and changes that proved quite controversial. So we see now that Odashiyama, being a Street Fighter fan, actually changed a lot of the aspects of the actual game itself. Not only that, but he was the one that wanted to do the 17-year time skip and come up with the anime-esque inspired replacement characters, and they do mention that a lot of people complain they were one note. I am 100% on board and agree with that. They are literally just replacements, even though their moveset is slightly varied, and they may have a little bit different of a personality affect than their original. They're pretty much the same character. It's almost as if they wanted to de-age them and throw them into a different era. And then we have sequel gap. The gap between 5 and 6 is the longest in series history, spanning almost 7 years. In another sense, as 6 is more of a sequel to the original Soul Calibur games and Soul Edge than the soft reboot than was 5, one could say that it's been 10 years since the last main installment of Soul Calibur 4. Stillborn franchise in brackets. Soul Calibur 5 was meant to be the start of a new direction for the series, and the then head, Daishi Oshidama, placed for follow-ups that would have adhered to the game's status quo. In fact, 5 was originally going to be called Soul Edge 2. In order to signify it, however, due to a combination of backlash over the game's story, the settings, and characters, the series was going on hiatus for many years afterwards. Odashiyama himself leaving the team less than 2 years after 5, and in general sentiment that the series needed to return to its roots to survive. This did not come to be. Soul Calibur 6 would eventually be made, but the game hit the reset button specifically to escape the direction 5 was going to take the series and return to the setting that 5 was trying to shed, which Okubo outright admitted was because the series was on thin ice after 5. And we also know that it's not just thin ice after 5, the series was ultimately cancelled. But there's a lot more that we know about this. I just wanted to give a few of my thoughts and opinions on this. And again, thank you guys for watching this long video. I know these like docu mini-series size videos can drag on a bit. I just like to, especially for my subscribers who are here in every video, I want to like update you guys with the most knowledgeable information so that if you do have to go somewhere else and talk to somebody about it, you guys understand what you're talking about. There's a lot of like he said, she said that goes on in this community, especially when it comes down to people playing developer. And what I mean by playing developer is there's people that understand like one aspect, and this is to no fault of their own. I don't expect everyone to go out and study every aspect of marketing, of financing, of project layout, of direction, of crunch. I don't expect everyone to know all these aspects. That's what my job is. That's why I try to give you guys the information that you would hopefully want to use. But a lot of people will talk about that one aspect and they'll argue it. Now, I was in debate, and here's the thing, the main goal of debate. They would always say, they would give you two propositions to one aspect of a story. So let's say it was Timmy's fault that Lucas fell down the well, okay? Now they would tell you that it's almost like a court setting. They would tell you that this is the subject, and they wouldn't tell you which side you're arguing against. Was Lucas to blame for Timmy falling down the well, or was it inadvertently an accident or whatever? You can take any subject, and you wouldn't know what you're actually going to be arguing for. So you basically have to study both propositions, both evidence on both sides, and now you have not only a solid part of your own argument, but whatever side that you're on, you'll be able to argue efficiently against because you understand it from that perspective. And that's really important because today a lot of times people will start from one side and completely just villainize the other side or villainize the other opinion and completely shut it down on the outset and not take any new information in, and that leads to creating bubbles and fissures within communities and stuff like that. And I only bring this up as a little anecdote to say that like when you're starting from a starting point like that, like let's say that one that I've seen a lot, and this is again to no fault of your own, I don't fault you for thinking this way because this is a very not common, but a very intelligent way to start the conversation, but you just have to go more from there and dig it a little bit more. I've heard, well, Soul Calibur 6's budget doesn't matter. A lot of companies do this with other games and they have much smaller budgets. Now, if I were to say you're going to argue that point effectively, you would have to know both sides, and there's more than two sides to that. So if you're talking about an ought from an is, then we get nowhere because you don't understand the other part of the side. And I'm not blaming anyone, but there's a lot more that goes on from the team's aspect, from the publisher's aspect, from the financier's aspect, from the marketing team, development team's aspect. There's a lot more that goes into it than just this should have been done. It's easy for us to say as fans that like we want our favorite characters to come back. I know that especially. My favorite character in the series is Hwang Sung-young. And even though he's rumored to be the next character, and it is in the data files, I've been wanting him back since technically Soul Calibur, Soul Edge, basically. He was in Soul Calibur, and Soul Calibur 3 he was added in later. I mean, he's got his assassin parts and the style, but not until Arcade Edition was he actually fully playable. So I understand this, but I can't just come right out and say, I want Hwang back and so does everybody else, because first of all, we're creating a straw man argument, which means that like I'm making an argument for the other side that they don't actually hold, which is a non sequitur and a false start. A lot of you guys, if you want to watch more of this, you can go back and check out my logical fallacies video on argumentation, especially within the Soul Calibur community. And this may seem like a throwaway part of this, but just remember, guys, there's two sides to every story. There's nuance to everything. There's not always going to be a bad guy, and there's not always going to be a good guy. And I think, if anything, Soul Calibur is analogous to that. Soul Edge and Soul Calibur are not two sides of the opposite spectrum. They're two sides of the same coin. They do things exactly the same way, but they just have different preferences about which way they want things to end up. They go about talking about like they're representative of chaos and order, but it's more like they're representative of their own wills. And after absorbing all the souls of the fighters that they've had, those souls being the audience, that gets put into it itself, and its own fruitions try to come out. So there's no bad guy or good guy in this scenario. If you want to blame the publisher, Bandai Namco, for giving them a shoestring budget, I guess you could, but Bandai Namco is also a business that has financiers that place investment in them. They have stocks that they need to keep up with. They have quotas and financial margins that they have to give to their accounting team that needs to put forth to the funders to keep their funding going. A lot of venues will cancel tournaments with them or other things, or marketing teams would break up that are outside of the source itself, depending on reviews or something like that. So they are beholden to keep them, the developers meaning, to a certain schedule and a strict criteria of release order. And if that falls out line of what they are willing to budget or put into the game or invest into the game, then they're well within their rights to scrap that, whether or not we like it or not. I mean, one of my favorite fighting game series of all time, Bushido Blade, I've never seen again. There's other series that were taken in horrible directions, like Bloody Roar. I'm a huge fan of Bloody Roar. They stopped on the PS2 and never went forward from there. I would love to see a return to that. There's like Primal Rage. There's a ton of different games that we may love, but they didn't meet the expectations that they were given. And that's no excuse to anybody across the board, and I'm not standing for anything, and I'm not saying that you should literally just like free blame from everybody, because there is blame that's placed all around, as we can read in the article, as well as the development team, not just Bandai Namco themselves, and the fans themselves as well. But at the end of the day, it's a game, it's something that we love, and we're allowed to talk whatever we want about it. I'm not saying that anybody doesn't have the right to say whatever they want. You definitely can. I just want to try to argue with more of the factual evidence to be able to represent your side of the argument better, if that makes sense. But with that being said, guys, I want to thank you for watching this long video. I really appreciate it. If you made it to the end of the video, please, in the comment section down below, let's drop the phrase Patroclus Reboot. And if I see Patroclus Reboot, that means that I know that you made it to the end of the video. And I want to thank you guys for that. And as always, thank you. And thick you. Hey, what's up, guys? Have you always wanted some sweet Mark Yoon merch? Maybe a thick you shirt, maybe a shirt from Squirt, maybe my pretty face with my logo all over your body, or a throw pillow, or blanket, or anything? Well, you're in luck, because I just launched my merch store, and it is going to be available on Redbubble, and you will find a link to it in my description box down below. It's got a lot of quality content and a lot of good stuff for you to pick up, so you can show your support for the channel and just rep Mark Yoon. Alright, guys.